Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Nafisa. This is Rain here, the other staff at SBA. I'm going to do a land acknowledgement, and then I will introduce the folks here as well. So we acknowledge that we are gathered on sacred land here on the territories of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nation, the Seneca and Mississaugas of New Credit. So this land is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant and agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Anishinaabe and Allied Nations. The Dish with One Spoon demonstrates our collective responsibility to care for and share the land and its resources. We are here because this land was and is still occupied, and it is for us to recognize this colonial history present and to respect the Indigenous elders, ancestors, and the stewards of this land, as well as to honor our responsibilities to this land and recognize that we are all treaty people. If you are from other territories, you're also welcome to type into the chat which territories you are from and let us know that. So my name is Rain. As I mentioned, I'm the campaigns coordinator at the Student for Barrier Free Access. And Nafisa is our other staff and then coordinator at the Student for Barriers Free Access. Students for Barrier Free Access is a student-led nonprofit group that advocates for the intersectional access and equity and inclusion. We advocate for disabilities justice, and all of our programming and advocacy is shaped through this framework. And this event is also co-hosted with APIS, and we have a few folks from APIS here as well too. So we want to thank APIS for supporting us as well. Am I missing anything? No, I think I'm good. If there's anything that I'm missing, please let me know. In the meantime, I want to introduce now Naomi and Lauren, who are two law students from the Downtown Legal Services, who will be doing this presentation with us. So I will give it to you two, and you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. So today, Naomi and I will be presenting on academic appeals and just how to get through them. Great.
So your first question is, this is sort of what we're going to go through in the presentation. We're going to talk about what an academic appeal is, some common remedies you can ask for, and sort of approximate deadlines for some of the petitions to give you an idea of when you need to be asking for them, what goes into an appeal, so what kind of documents you should be including, and what the process is for an appeal. Just a reminder or sort of a note, the information we're presenting today is not legal advice. It is just some information about how the system works at U of T. If you need legal advice, you do need to contact the clinic directly. We can give general information here, but not advice specific to someone's situation. The information in this presentation is also tailored primarily towards the St. George Faculty of Arts and Science and UTSC. Check your academic calendar for information in all other departments. Everyone follows a fairly similar process to what we've laid out here, but every department and faculty has their own sort of names for the boards and things. So you want to make sure you're looking and consulting with your registrar directly. At the end of the presentation, we'll have some links as to where you can find that information for every part of the University of Toronto. These slides are also meant to be used in conjunction with the presentation, not as a standalone document, as our sort of disclaimer.
So first, to start off, what is an academic appeal? So an academic appeal is an appeal from the university's decision that you failed to meet an academic requirement or the application of an academic requirement. And it can only provide for academic remedies, and then we will cover those in more details later, but they cannot provide you for financial remedies. So you cannot get your tuition back or get damages for a human rights violation. So in certain exceptional cases, the Governing Council has recommended financial remedies, but that's not the norm. And also, if you have a human rights case, for instance, if you requested an accommodation and was not granted, you can bring those type of cases to the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario.
And we'll go through some resources for how you can do that right at the end, but that isn't sort of the scope of the presentation generally. So some common remedies or things that you can ask for from the university are listed here, and we'll go through them. This is not the whole list. There are lots of things you can ask for, especially specific to your situation, but these are sort of the common ones that tend to come up the most. So the first one is an extension of time to submit coursework beyond the end of term. So this means that you're asking to submit coursework beyond the end of the exam period, which is longer than what your professor can grant you on sort of their own discretion. The deadline to request this is shortly after the end of term. Every faculty is going to have their own deadlines for this, but usually it's right at the end of the term. And this would just mean that you're asking for sort of a longer time to submit your work. Another common petition is a grade appeal. These are slightly trickier. You don't start these by filing a petition. If you want a grade to be reviewed just sort of on its own merits, rather than say try and have a extension added onto a paper to get your grade raised that way, you need to be contacting your department directly as soon as possible, and each department will have their own processes for how they handle regrades and requests for regrading. A really common remedy we get is a late withdrawal from the course. So this is what you might ask for if you have, if you want to essentially drop the course from your transcript after the deadline for late withdrawal has passed. So this means that you'll have the course still show up on your transcript, but just with the late withdrawal, it won't go towards your GPA or affect you academically. These should be requested in circumstances where something has come up after the late withdrawal deadline for the course that has prevented you from completing the course. And it's going to look like exceptional circumstances. It might be illness, it might be a tragedy in the family that you couldn't have predicted when you were first signing up for the course. The deadline for this is as early as possible, but roughly 6 months after the end of term. When you took the course, every department again is going to have their own deadlines, but that's sort of the approximate. The next thing that you can ask for is a deferred exam. So this might mean that that you're not going to be able to write your exam on the date given, because either due to personal circumstances or religious observance, and you need to ask to write it later. This varies by campus, but it's usually within 72 hours to 5 business days of the exam. This is particularly true when something has come up right before the exam, rather than something that you could have foreseen ahead of time. And again, every campus and department is going to have their own rules for this, so please check that deadline. The next, in terms of questions, we are going to hold them to the end, just so that you have all of the information here, because some questions may be answered throughout, but keep it in your mind, and we will have lots of time to answer them at the end of the presentation. Another thing that you can ask for is called aggregate standing. This is a remedy that comes from the Department of Engineering, but we have asked for in other circumstances and do get it from other departments. It is essentially means you get a credit for the course without a grade. So it counts, you kind of have met the requirements of the course, but it won't appear as a grade for your GPA. This is sort of similar to what we have now in a lot of departments, which is credit, no credit. So this is for circumstances when you likely would have passed the course, but for exceptional circumstances that have arisen. There's no timeline for this, but we usually say try for 6 months after the end of the course, since it is sort of similar to a late withdrawal in this way. Another thing that you can ask for, and this is true often in graduate students, is reinstatement to program or early return from suspension. So this is the cases where you've been removed from your program, usually for failing to meet academic requirements or put on a suspension for various reasons. And these, they just want you to ask within a reasonable time. So contact your department because that is going to vary wildly in every circumstance. The final common remedy that we ask for is a chance to rewrite an exam. So this would be in the specific circumstances where something has come up in the middle of an exam that has failed, that means you failed to complete it. In the past, this has looked like you might have had a panic attack in the middle of your exam that stopped you from writing it. In the kind of times we live in now, this is often also going to look like internet connectivity issues that came up that stopped you from writing the course. All right.
And the deadline, there's no specific one, but you should do it as soon as possible.
Yeah.
So moving on, sorry.
So you know what, I can answer that question now because it is very, very specific.
Okay.
The 72 hours to 5 business days is for a deferred exam, a deferred exam or the deadline to write it after you've missed it. It's for the deferred exam, not the deadline to write it. So that's when you're supposed to be requesting it. And again, all of the information there, you're going to want to verify with your registrar itself, because that is something that does tend to change from department to department and also from year to year.
Okay, so moving on for things to remember. So for the St. George campus, your petition should be submitted to your college's registrar office, and you should use your U of T address. For UTSC and UTM, you should send your petition through their petitions portal, which is found on the registrar's website. And that form will include your statement and all the supporting information. And if you're at one campus, but you're taking a course at another campus, you should follow the appeals process of that campus. So for instance, if you're a St. George student taking courses at the Scarborough campus, you would use the Scarborough petition system.
So some common ways you might think about the grounds for your petition. So the reason you might be giving to the faculty to grant it to you. So sort of this is ways you might construct an argument. So these are the 3 main common ones. They're certainly not exhaustive, and if you find things may fit in more than one category. So the first one is medical grounds. So this is going to look like circumstances where a disability or an illness has prevented the student from meeting the academic standard. So this might look like a disability flare-up. That means that you cannot hand in a paper on time and you need to ask for an extension, and your extension wasn't granted, and as a consequence, you failed the course. So that's sort of one scenario that might play out there. Another one might be that you were unable to write your exam and couldn't finish the course because of that. So the Ontario Human Rights Code imposes a duty to accommodate students to the point of undue hardship on the university. And we'll discuss this a little bit in more detail there, but essentially it means that they have to accommodate you as much as possible. And they certainly have to accommodate you within the means that they've already agreed to. For example, if you're already registered with accessibility services and are granted those extensions. The way you make that argument is you would say first that you have experienced a medical condition at the time of your course or the relevant time of the assignment, which affected your academic abilities, and that those impacts prevented you from meeting the standard. So you say, okay, I had a migraine and I couldn't complete my work. And because I couldn't complete my work and look at the screen, that meant that I have failed the course this way. And then you would argue that you need to be accommodated under the Ontario Human Rights Code. The the second way that we often construct petitions is on procedural grounds. So this might mean that the decision maker did not follow the rules or guidelines in the appeal, or in the case of a professor, not following the rules throughout the semester. This can look like, for example, no reasons being given for denying a petition, improper factors being considered in the decision, or the decision made by the university being biased or not impartial are all grounds for a procedural appeal. Other kind of smaller things might look like the department not following its own policies. So in the case of graduate students, for example, you're supposed to have 2 negative committee meetings before you can be terminated from the program for lack of progress. If they were only to give you 1 committee meeting and then suggest termination, that would be a procedural appeal because they haven't followed their own rules. So you make that argument by stating the rule or standard, explaining how the rule hasn't been met, and then explaining how this has negatively affected you. So often very similar to the way medical grounds work. The final and sort of most comprehensive ground is compassionate grounds. So this means that something unexpected and beyond your control happened that prevented you from meeting the academic standard. So the most common example of this might be a death in the family, or other circumstances that have arisen that have sort of kept you from being able to focus on your work. Other circumstances have been evictions, or trouble with the law has also been used before. So the way you do this is you demonstrate that this event occurred. You need to demonstrate that it was unexpected. It wasn't something that you could plan for ahead of time. And then you need to show how it prevented you from meeting the standard. So in all of these cases, you're essentially showing the event or circumstances that occurred, and then explaining how this has been connected to your inability to meet the standard the university expected.
So to elaborate more on the duty to accommodate, so where there is an academic requirement that negatively impacts you and the negative impact is because of your membership in a protected group, then the university has a duty to accommodate you to the point of undue hardship. So examples of a protected group are your race or religion, your family status, or disability. Something that wouldn't be protected is, for instance, something that doesn't fall within those, like political belief, for instance. So the university has to accommodate you, but you still have to be able to complete the essential activities of the program. To give an example, if your professor has been refusing to give you an extension or the chance to rewrite a test that you missed because of your disability, then the university has a duty to accommodate you by granting you an opportunity to hand in the assignment or rewrite your test.
So when you are requesting accommodations sort of throughout the semester from your professors, there are some rules that apply at the university. Your responsibility, if you're going to request accommodations on the basis of disability, you need to provide the necessary documentation to accessibility services, get your accommodations approved by them, and then ask your professor for them with your accommodations letter. Although you can and should, if necessary, ask your professor for extensions without having first gone to accessibility services, they are not obliged to grant them without that process being in place. This university views accessibility services as the way accommodations should be approved and granted. They're considered sort of the experts in assessing what accommodations are appropriate. So you need to also, doing this, request accommodations by the required deadlines posted in your syllabus, or as soon as possible, if not by the deadline. If you miss the deadline, that's fine. Just make sure you're sort of not waiting longer than necessary. So on that's your job. Make sure you have your accommodations letter and have gone through accessibility services. On the other hand, the faculty needs to maintain your confidentiality. They shouldn't be disclosing your information to anyone. They need to facilitate reasonable accommodations. So this usually means things that are within what the university has approved for you, or things that are sort of within reason to ask for. This should not be cost particularly, but that's very much a university specific and fact specific determination as to what counts as reasonable under the circumstances. They also need to talk to your accessibility advisor before denying you an extension. They should not be denying an extension outright or not considering it, even if it is after the deadline, if they're going to deny what you've asked for, especially if it is in your accommodation letter.
Yes, mommy.
You need to do this in conversation with your accessibility advisor, not as an outright decision. They also should still be considering accommodations after the deadline within sort of the existing processes that exist. So even if you were supposed to ask for an extension before your assignment was due, if you do it afterwards, they should still at least consider your request. They shouldn't be simply denying it as a rule.
So when it comes to constructing your petition, when you send it to your registrar, you should make it professional, so make sure to proofread. And when you describe your story, tell it like a narrative. So use the questions like what happened, when it happened, why are you appealing, and how has your life been affected? And be very specific about dates. Also be clear with the remedy you're requesting. You can request remedies in the alternative. So for instance, if you're asking for late withdrawal, you could ask for something else in the alternative if that is not granted. And support each claim that you're making with evidence if possible. So attach copies of all relevant documents. For instance, if you are using a disability, then you should have medical documents proving that. And always explain why the documents are relevant to your specific case.
So in terms of the kind of documents you might want to be giving the university, you can submit these shortly after you've done your petition. They don't have to be submitted at once, but check the handbook, because every faculty and every department might have slightly different deadlines for this. That said, submit your petition anyways. If you're still, it's better to have your petition in on time and your documents waiting than it is to wait for everything and have a late petition. The documents that you're using should be contemporaneous. So any medical notes should be from the period of time you're requesting. It shouldn't be a sort of doctor's note multiple years before the fact. If what you're requesting is sort of an extension on an assignment during the semester due to illness. They should also be the best evidence that you have of the facts. This is going to look like the most official document. So you're going to want to have, for example, a copy of an obituary rather than an email that you wrote to your professor, just saying that the circumstances had happened. Any documents should identify your name, the dates, and your relationship to the author of the note. So for example, if it is a doctor, it should say that they are your doctor and the date on which they wrote the note. If the documents are not in English, they should include, where possible, a certified English translation. So the university will have information on its website of what they're looking for there, but essentially they aren't going to want to rely on your own translation of the documents, or certainly they would prefer to have it be certified. They should also, any document you have, include the contact information of the author so that the university can get in touch with them to verify the information.
So when it comes to medical documents, they should include a description of the impact your symptoms had on your academic performance. It should include the timeline of the impact, and also, as Naomi mentioned, the medical professional's contact information. So to continue, you may require a verification of illness form and or registration with accessibility services or letter of accommodation, depending on whether registration with accessibility service is relevant in your case. And so to defer exams, you should use the absence declaration tool on Acorn, but that is, you should double check before, because policies may have changed in the past years.
Yeah, so medical documentation in particular has been changing, the requirements have been changing significantly throughout the pandemic. So if you're doing that, please ensure that you are checking the most up-to-date information or the information that was relevant at the time of the petition that you're talking about. Whether or not the university is requiring medical documentation has been changing. And that's sort of the disclaimer on the medical stuff there. Some examples of non-medical documentation you might include would be email chains between you and the faculty. So you might want to show the date that you had requested an accommodation or prove to the university that the faculty had said what they did to you in terms of representations or advice you'd gotten. It might be a death certificate or obituary where a death in the family has affected your ability to work. It might be a traffic accident report if, for example, you missed an exam because of a car crash or you were injured in a traffic accident. It can look like reports from legal personnel, whatever that means in the circumstances, be it a police report or advice that you've received from a lawyer, basically official documents that show what you are trying to argue. In the case of often test problems recently, especially with online school, this can look like evidence of electronic malfunctions. So for example, a screenshot of your a time-stamped screenshot of your computer page with the no internet icon. If you're going to say that your internet had acted out during an exam, they're going to want that evidence after the fact. They can also include meeting notes or recordings of meetings you've had with university officials. However, any recordings you make need to be with permission. If the person you're with denies permission to record the meeting, you should not be including those recordings in your petition. The university does not look kindly on that. They see it as evidence of bad faith. If the person denies recordings, simply take the best notes you can during the meeting or write it up after the fact. So you have a record that is fairly contemporaneous.
So when it comes to submitting petitions past the deadline, you should make an argument that it's fair to still hear the petition. So 4 factors you need to address are, first, that there is a reasonable chance of success. So you would kind of address the strongest point of your case there. Second, you have to prove that you had a continuing intention of appeal. So for instance, communications telling university that you still intend to appeal or that you were working on getting documentation. Third, you have to have a good explanation for the delay. So for instance, that if you had a disability that was impacting you, that it still impacted you, that's why you could not submit your petition promptly. And 4, you have to prove that it's not unfair to the university. So that no witnesses or evidence are missing because of the delay, that everything is still available.
So that's particularly relevant in cases where it's been, for example, 20 years since it occurred that you're appealing. They might not still have those documents around. The professors may no longer work for the university. In cases where the professors don't work there, you're going to want to show that the university can still easily get in touch with them, because I know lots of professors do move around very frequently. So this is a general overview of the undergraduate appeals process. So it starts with an informal resolution with the instructor, and often the department as well will be in touch at that stage. If it is not resolved at that stage, or simply by discussing it with an academic advisor, you're going to want to submit your initial petition to the registrar's office using whatever guidelines they've told you to do. This is usually going to be a fairly short document. If this is denied, and they just read it, they're not going to come back to you and ask you more questions, then you can appeal to the Committee on Standing, which is the first appeal stage.
So to talk about the Committee on Standing, so the deadline to appeal to them is 90 days from receiving your decision on the petition to the registrar. And the documents you're going to need are the request for review of petition decision form and a statement of appeal. And you will also need to include any new evidence that arose or evidence. There is no right of response or reply, and there is no oral hearing. It will simply be written.
So often that's going to look a lot like the first petition stage. And again, every faculty, department, campus has their own process at that point. So do check what they're asking for there, but it's often going to go back to the registrar again, and it's sort of they're just checking again to see if you provided more information. The next stage of appeal is to the Academic Appeals Board, as it's called at the St. George Campus Faculty of Arts and Science. It's the Academic Appeals Subcommittee at UTM. I believe UTSC has a very similar name for it. This is the first stage at which Downtown Legal Services will be able to help you. We can't step in at the earlier stages. You need to have filed in the arts and science process. This is for undergraduates. You need to have filed 2 petitions before you get to this. This is going to be a slightly more formal process. You have more space to fill out the form, which is one of the reasons why we can help at this point a little bit more.
Okay, so just to elaborate about the Academic Appeal Board or subcommittee, the deadline is again 90 days from the last appeal that you made, or 90 days from the decision from that appeal. And the documents required are the notice of appeal form, statement of appeal, and supporting documentation. Again, there is no response or reply, but there is an opportunity to present your case before a panel and for the panel to ask you questions about your case.
And you can have a legal representative or someone come with you to that meeting if you want. You have a right to representation there. So the final stage is an appeal to the Governing Council's Academic Appeal Committee. And this is your last appeal. If your petition is denied at this stage, there isn't another opportunity for submissions. And if Lauren, let's go to the next slide, I'll explain a little bit more about it. So the deadline here is 90 days from the Academic Appeal Board Committee decision. So 90 days from the decision before that, you need to file a notice of appeal form, which can be found on the Governing Council website, a statement of appeal, and your supporting documents. This is going to look a little bit more formal. You're going to want to provide as much evidence as possible. They have guidelines for the kind of submissions you should be giving them that are on their website. And it does require sort of tab numbers and a certain amount of formatting that they're going to expect there. They're going to want it to be, for example, paginated so they can easily find their way through the document. After you file this, the department or faculty has 60 days to file their response. So they are going to sort of write back and explain their case and their side of the story. After you get this, you have 14 days for the student to file their reply. So reply is only going to respond to new matters raised by the department or faculty. If they've simply denied what you've said, you don't need to explain yourself or make your arguments again. It's only if they brought up new facts that you need to answer to. After this, a hearing will be scheduled. The Governing Council sits about 3 times a year, and you'll have your opportunity to present your case to the panel. The department will also have the opportunity to present their case, and the panel will ask you both questions. The panel is comprised of faculty members and students, and it has a legally qualified chair. So usually a professor from the Faculty of Law who sort of ensures that fairness is followed throughout the whole process.
Okay, so now moving on to the graduate process. So to give a small overview, it looks sort of similar to the undergraduate process, but the appeal situation is a bit different. So it would start with an informal resolution with the instructor, and then you would discuss the matter with the graduate coordinator or associate chair of the department. And then for all disputes except the failure of a final PhD oral examination or a related termination of your registration in a program, you would appeal to the graduate department academic appeals committee. But if the case is that you have failed a final PhD examination or been terminated from your program, then the first appeal would be directly to the Graduate Academic Appeals Board, which we will elaborate on shortly. So to speak on the Graduate Department Academic Appeals Committee, which is the first appeal level for everything except the failed PhD examination and termination from the program, the deadline is 8 weeks from the decision that is being appealed. And the documents are, again, the notice of appeal, which includes the statement of appeal and supporting documentation. There is no response or reply, and the hearing is oral or written. So the format will be at the discretion of the chair of the committee. And it is oral or written only, so it will not be a mixed format.
So if you are denied at the department level, you can then appeal to the Graduate Academic Appeals Board. So the deadline for this is within 8 weeks of the decision of the chair of the Graduate Department Academic Appeals Committee. And the documents include a notice of appeal form, a statement of appeal, and supporting documents. Again, these are going to look a little bit longer and more formal. The department has 4 weeks to provide you to submit their own response, which is going to be similar to what we talked about at the governing council level. That's going to look like their side of the story. It's often going to look like the Graduate Department Academic Appeal Committee also justifying their decision because they do represent the department. You then have 1 week to file your reply. And again, this is just going to be a response to anything new that has come up. You don't need to restate your whole case again or provide any of the same evidence. After this, you're going to have your opportunity to present your case at a hearing in front of a panel, and for the department to present their case and for a panel to ask questions. So this is going to, again, consist of several members and a legally qualified chair, and it's going to be a little bit more formal than what you might get at the undergraduate level.
So I can go back to the slide with all the process again, just for everyone to finally see. And the final step in the graduate process is same as the undergraduate process. So it's also the Governing Council's Academic Appeals Committee, and all the processes for that look the same. So I think this concludes the part just about the process, and Naomi will give you an overview of the other resources available now.
Yeah, so that's sort of, in a sum, the academic appeals process. This, of course, isn't going to encompass all of the things that you may want to argue with the university about. It's very specific to academic remedies. So you can't appeal denial of accommodations, like we said, or financial remedies there. There are, however, other places you can look. So just some resources generally on academic appeals. This link here is going to show you all of the information from the Registrar of Arts and Science on the petition process, and each of your registrars will have this information as well. That'll be specific to your campus. The Academic Success Center is usually a good resource to go to if you are struggling with your courses. They have a lot of really helpful resources. I will also say that the university will often consider your petition favorably if it looks like you are taking steps to improve your academics for the future. This can also look like booking meetings with an accessibility or an academic advisor. Accessibility services can be reached through this link, and it'll lay out their registration process there. They are a really helpful resource there and are necessary when requesting accommodations, typically at the university level. This here is the Governing Council Outline of Academic Appeals. So that link there will show you all of the processes for all of the departments. So you can go there and you can just kind of find your department from there. And this is also just a link to mental health resources that the university has to check out if you are struggling. So some resources that are more specific to disability accommodations. The Student Life Center has a really excellent guide to the accommodation process at the University of Toronto that will sort of outline the process, what can be asked for, and what your rights are throughout the process, as well as sort of what information the university might be looking for. Arch Disability Law Center will provide students with summary advice on their rights of accommodation at universities, or generally in the world, but universities specifically. So they are experts in disability law and can give you advice on what you might reasonably expect with accommodation, or what to do if you think that your rights have been violated. This is the Ontario Human Rights Centre's Statement on Access to Education for Students with Disabilities, which also sort of outlines what your expectations should be with respect to accommodation. And then the Human Rights Legal Support Center, which is the final link here, can provide you with help and summary advice in filing a human rights claim. So if you are, for example, going to file a claim because you believe you have been discriminated against by the university and you're not seeking an academic remedy, you're instead seeking to have different accommodations implemented than they've given you, you're going to want to go through the Human Rights Tribunal. This process, just a note, does take a much, much longer time than the academic appeals process. Human rights claims are currently taking about 2 years to resolve, approximately in the COVID-19 pandemic, sometimes longer, but they are sort of the resource to go to for that. And the deadline for filing a human rights claim is 1 year after the discrimination has occurred.
So just to speak a little bit about downtown legal services. So here are practice areas that are listed here. So anything that is university affairs, so academic appeals and university offenses, which are different. So in that case, it would be something like accusation of plagiarism, for instance. We also offer employment law services, housing law, family law, refugee and immigration law, as well as criminal law, but only for, I believe, Superior Court, not for courts of appeal. And if you require our services, you should call us at the line, the phone number provided, and that would reach our intake line. So you will be connected with a student caseworker, such as Naomi and I, and then we will just ask you a couple questions to see if we have availability, if we're able to help you. If not, we'll give you a referral, and if so, then we will connect you with a lawyer to provide you with either summary advice or to represent you before the Academic Appeals Board or the Governing Council Academic Appeals Committee.
Or any of the graduate levels we talked about.
Or other remedies that you may be asking for, but here it's just academic appeals we're presenting with. So as for eligibility for DLS services, just make sure that you have paid the DLS levy. I think the situation for opt-out, like if you have opt-out of the DLS levy, for instance, then you would not be eligible, and you just can check that by looking at your invoice on Acorn to
so something to note here, if you can also qualify for most of our services financially. So if you fall under the threshold for legal aid income, That is not true of academic appeals or university offenses. For those, just because of our mandate, we can only represent students who have paid the DLS levy. And I know, and this is unfortunate, I know some APIS students are probably here today. Part-time students at the University of Toronto do not qualify for the levy and therefore don't qualify for our services. That said, if you are seeking help with an academic appeal, it is still worth calling our intake line, as we do have a resource sheet we can send you that has more information on the process and the names of private lawyers who perform this kind of work, many of whom are former students of DLS who are now practicing law.
Okay, I think that may be our final slide. So thank you very much for listening, and we are here to answer any questions.
Yeah. So just going through what's here so far.
Will the slides be available?
Yeah, the slides won't be available on their own. We do prefer that they be viewed in conjunction with the presentation because the verbal explanation is important. But as Nafisa has pointed out, they will be on the recording that you can watch. So if you need, you can contact SBA and see the slides again through that process. In terms of your question about financial remedies. So the governing council, when I say the governing council has in the past recommended financial remedies, I mean that has happened exactly once. And that also isn't within their mandate. They have turned it down more than they have asked for it. The process for asking for financial remedies isn't through the academic appeals process at all. That is something you need to contact your registrar about. If you are seeking, for example, a tuition rebate. Even the governing council, no part of the university is going to recommend that you get, for example, punitive damages for harm that has been caused you. That isn't something that the university does on its own. That's something that you need to go to an outside court for. But in terms of a tuition fee appeal, that's something that you need to contact your registrar about, and they'll give you information on that process. That's something that exists separate from there. So contact your registrar for the tuition fee appeals question. We've been looking into it, and it's very hard to find specific information on. So it needs to, they consider those on a case-by-case basis, and needs to be done sort of separate to the academic appeals process. It's outside of what DLS can do.
So I think
yeah,
there is a question regarding
the levy.
Disabled students and
Yeah,
part-time.
I can absolutely ask that. The levy is not added to the part-time students' fees because your union has not held a referendum to request it. That is something that would need to be done outside of that. That's not a decision that Downtown Legal Services has made. That is an APIS decision, and I understand the process for having the fee added is quite complicated. But that's something you can contact them about, and they may have an answer for you at some point.
Mm-hmm. If not, in the meantime, you can still request a private lawyer, but then yes, that would come with, you would have to pay them to get help. And then for punitive damages beyond what the HRTO can offer, the HRTO can offer in some cases general damages for egregious human rights violations. They actually have large discretion for that. That said, superior courts do technically also have jurisdiction there, and you can file, lawsuits through there. But again, that is sort of outside of the expertise of Downtown Legal Services and isn't part of the academic appeals process. But if you are considering a claim against the university, I would suggest you contact a private lawyer. So someone has their hand raised.
Yeah, Jamie, if you want to speak.
Hi, sorry, are you able to hear me?
Yeah.
Sometimes my microphone doesn't work. So my name is Jamie, I, she, and her pronouns. I'm also the president of APIS, and we would like to do a levy. I just wanted to let folks here know who are part-time students. It is a bit of a complicated process. We have to hold, when we do the referendum, we have to have polling stations made available. We have to have like a CRO. There's a really big process, and we weren't really able to do it during the pandemic. So, but it is something that we are looking forward to doing, holding a referendum this coming term. If I'm elected, I will, I'm definitely trying to push for that. So yeah, so holding a referendum, but it was a really complicated process, and we have to have it done by March. Like, we have to have the polling stations closed by March. So by the time I had been aware, like I've been made aware of this, it was a little bit too late to hold the referendum and hire a CRO and to, get the polling stations available for accessibility purposes. But yes, that is something that APIS is, well, I am hoping forward, hoping for like moving forward. I love DLS and would really, yeah, that's it.
Are there any other questions? Feel free to put it in the chat, message me directly, or ask it out loud. And yes, thank you, Jamie. That's excellent to know and good to hear.
Yeah, I think I actually got asked this through an Insight line today. If someone wants help for a university offense, can they go through a community legal clinic?
Yeah, and the answer to that is no. So legal aid and community legal clinics in Toronto don't offer help for sort of academic appeals or claims against the university. That those need to go to private lawyers, unfortunately. That isn't, legal aid only funds a very specific subset of law, and university tribunals aren't on that list. Do we have any more questions about academic appeals or downtown legal services in general?
Looks like not.
Yeah, looks like we don't. Okay. Oh,
and please contact them during their hours. This is a really good session. We want to thank everyone for being here. We want to thank Naomi and Lauren for being here, as well as Dean and Nick for being here. And some of you have raised some very, very great questions. We want to thank APIS for being here and supporting us as well too. We will be having this recording available. Like I said, I'm going to be setting up a YouTube and have this available as well. We're going to be posting the link to it on our website as well. So thank you everyone for coming, and you're welcome to head out now.
Bye, folks. Thanks for joining us.
Okay.